Marty, I know that you rejoined us for a special 15-minute insert here, one-on-one with Superintendent Carvalho of Miami-Dade, who has joined us probably either from Tallahassee or Miami-Dade. So Superintendent, welcome. And Dr. West, over to you for hopefully about 7.5 minutes with you and Alberto and 7.5 minutes with the rest of us.
Thanks, JR. Then I'm going to jump right in and tell Alberto that I offered you a very generous, lengthy introduction earlier, but you weren't around to hear it. So, but one of the reasons we had you on this panel on the contemporary crisis in American education is because amidst the wide variation we saw in the effectiveness of district responses, Miami-Dade seems to have earned attention for doing a particularly good job. So I wonder if you could start out by just telling us what principles informed the district's response to the pandemic? How did you go about applying those principles? And how has your approach evolved through the start of this school year?
Yeah, well, number one, I'm so sorry for having defaulted on my commitment, but Governor DeSantis, Governor of Florida, and the county mayor came into town and notified me that they were making decisions regarding the phase 2 transition for our county, which has many implications. I'll talk a little bit about that after I respond to your first question. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for the opportunity. Look, I will actually segment your question into a two-part answer, referencing specifically what we did leading to the spring of 2020 that led to the shutdown of schools in Miami-Dade and across the country, and then pivot very quickly to the reopening of schools, also in a distance learning format. And both experiences are, so far apart. So we were, as a school system, probably better prepared. Our level of readiness exceeded the national average by far for a number of reasons. Number one, we did not ignore the threat that we first identified in China. So as far back as January, we developed a pandemic plan. We updated our pandemic plan, assuming the very worst condition, which is it's going to hit us. It's going to hit us hard, particularly considering the density in Miami-Dade. And what would the setting be? And what can we do? What is our response if our community does what Wuhan, China did, or other cities and countries did, which is a shutdown of society? How do we react as a school system? So we benefited from that early detection and attention to the issue. And we actually developed a preparedness plan for that eventuality, which came to pass. March 13th, we shut down schools. By that time, we had an instructional continuity plan 1.0 negotiated with our teachers union, an instructional continuity plan 2.0 negotiated with our union. We had developed pacing guides for distance learning, which are different than pacing guides for physical face-to-face learning. But the real enabler that really put us in that position is that we had passed a referendum back in 2012 to achieve a digital transformation in Miami-Dade. So part of it was used for capital, part of it was used for a real technology transformation in Miami-Dade, with massive investments for Wi-Fi, ubiquitous and universal, massive amounts of digital content that is aligned to state standards, and for every single subject area, every single course, in addition to, obviously, the first steps in our journey of a one-to-one to eliminate the digital divide in Miami-Dade, and hotspots for children whose families did not have access to connectivity. So from day one, part of our plan prior to the shutdown of the schools, we had surveyed all parents, surveyed all students. We knew who needed technology resources, who needed a computer that would meet the spec requirement of our digital platform and digital applications. We had the teachers trained, 2 days of training to reacquaint them with their obligations, but also the requirements of distance learning, with minimum face-to-face requirement with cameras on with the students, in addition to synchronous and asynchronous teaching. So by the time we shut down schools, we probably had a very seamless transition that resulted in average attendance rates exceeding 91% daily. I think that was not the case across the country. Connectivity rates of close to 100%. And but still with a huge concern over what we're seeing now this year, which is the compound effect of these academic regressions because of the disruption of the fourth quarter, compounded by the typical summer regression. But even that we dealt with. We built summer virtual programs, 2 summer virtual programs targeting the students that we knew would lose most ground. Now let me pivot. So we got high marks for the spring shutdown and transition to distance learning. We surveyed our parents and our teachers, as we often do at the end of that phase. And one of the things that we got across the board is, look, too many access points, even though we have a single platform, too many digital applications that we have to navigate within the school day. It is disruptive. We're losing a degree of time in doing so. Can you do something about it? And we went to the private sector for assistance. So the state of Florida regulates the number of digital content curriculum providers down to about 3. One, we had a bad experience years ago. And then you have Florida Virtual and K-12. And after much research, and we'd had a contractual agreement with K-12 for homeschooling and other programs here in Miami-Dade for a better part of a decade, they emerged as the strongest entity. Now, this is where obviously the politics comes into play. There's a strong connection, historical connection of K-12 to the choice movement, to charter schools, charter school management, et cetera. We negotiated within the acquisition, not of management, but of the curriculum and the platform. And obviously all of the data migration for students and teachers. We had a very, very tight timeline because all of this needed to be submitted to the state for an approval of the reopening plan. And unlike the spring, we did face significant challenges with the private sector partner, K-12. We had a strong vision, and K-12 has admitted to this. We had a strong vision, a strong plan that did not meet the engineering and implementation on the side of K-12. And after a number of days of K-12 experience this school year, a combination of significant engineering failures on their side and a recognition that they could not fix them in time. We had to revert back to the platform that teachers were trained on, the pacing guides, through Microsoft Zoom and Teams. So that was disappointing for us, but we needed to pivot very quickly, and we did that this week. We're in the second week of this school year. But the digital equity issue was resolved up front. We are in a good place as we kick off this school year.
We have questions pouring in from panelists and from the audience. So I'm going to ask you to be as brief as possible. I'm going to ask a couple more and then kick it over to CR to handle questions from the crowd. As you know, Congress is in the midst of discussing another round of stimulus aid, including potentially a substantial amount of funding for K-12 schools. In your view, is that funding needed? And regardless of your answer to that question, what else, if anything, do you need from the federal government at this point?
So let me start with actually the policy perspective. I need flexibility. I mean, we have an antiquated system of funding education at all levels. Mandated seat time is most often the case. And I think this pandemic has proven to us that in an emergency situation, we need to pivot to a different model. And Florida has done that. But across the country, I think, and federally speaking, there needs to be some degree of pressure to change the funding model for education. Secondly, we have an outdated model of supporting technology expenditures in school systems, whether they are charter networks or school boards. The FCC rules and regulations specific to E-rate are absurd, that force you really to make commitments and match funding to the federal government for investments in outdated technology that does not help districts in navigating the flexibility and choices that parents are making. So for example, we need to rely more on portable devices, which are not naturally authorized under E-rate regulations. So we really need to look at the federal code that guides education and provide more flexibility for districts that are much more adaptive to and adaptable and forceful about choice. I think that everybody there knows that 74% of our students are in non-traditional programs. Many of them are in magnet programs, single gender schools, career academies, and charter schools. So this is doable, and the paradigm of funding needs to shift. Very quickly, yes, we will need the funding in the state of Florida. We received the first phase of the CARES Act. We have spent very little of it other than essential protective gear, disinfectant, and equipment for our schools. But we know we're going to hit a fiscal abyss very soon. Moody's Analytical predicts that Florida probably will face a $9 billion deficit by the end of this fiscal year. And Florida does not have $9 billion worth of reserves. So if we are to protect public education funding, both traditional, charter, there's got to be a second federal investment to protect the viability of K-12 education across the country. But I hope it comes with protections and rewards for districts that have been prudent in the expenditures of the first phase.
And a quick question about reopening in person. I know you feel a sense of urgency about doing that as soon as possible. One of the reasons you were with the governor earlier. I know that the teachers union in Florida has been trying to hit the brakes on that process a little bit in a number of counties.
Right.
How do you navigate that tension between what the union is saying and what you're trying to do, what presumably you think parents and students want?
Right. So, believe it or not, considering the large nature of Miami-Dade, fourth largest school system in America, and by far the largest in the state of Florida, our relationship with the union over the past 10 years, and I've been superintendent for 12, has been reasonably peaceful and collaborative. And we have not had the level of pushback in our community that we have observed in other parts of the country, even statewide. In addition to that, I think we sort of immunized ourselves from some of the potential conflict by doing some really smart things. Number one, appointing very, very quickly early on a distinguished panel of medical advisors that developed for us the advisory gating criteria specific to the county's evolution from phase 1 to phase 2, depending on local health conditions. And when you have a former Surgeon General of the United States of America, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who, by the way, participates in activities at the Harvard Kennedy Center, as part of that panel that advises me, when you have the head of pediatric medicine for the University of Miami, when you have the top epidemiologists in our community in that panel as well, and they all agreed on 8 specific criteria that needed to be met over a 2-week period of time prior to the reopening of schools, side by side with a phase 2 declaration, which the governor announced today for this coming Monday, then you're protected. Who could argue with that very logical, scientifically based set of criteria? And the good news for us is that even though we were the epicenter of America just a few weeks ago, we reached a high point of 28% positivity rate with ICU bedding depletion quickly approaching, high mortality, morbidity. We have reversed that through social measures. So we're now in a position where out of the 8 criteria recommended, they're all headed in a downward direction. All the trends are good. Our projections put us in a position where side by side with phase 2 declaration by the governor, we should be able to open our schools within weeks, certainly by September 30th, if not earlier, but no later than October 5th. And I really want to bring the highest needs kids, students with disabilities, English language learners, and the youngest learners as early possibly as 2 to 3 weeks from now.
Well, I could ask questions all day, but I know, CR, you've been gathering some, so.
Yeah, so Alberto, I'm walking the virtual hallways here, and we got about 4 questions that we got to cover in about 5 minutes. So
got it.
Let's see if we can get to it. Let's see how quick we can get through the first one. Do you agree with the Council of Great City Schools position that big urban districts should not participate in NAEP 2021?
So that's a tough one for me because I wear 2 hats, as Marty and Dr. Peterson know. I am both a member of the Council of Great City Schools as a superintendent, but I'm also on a governing board of NAEP. I'm part of NAGB, as Marty is. And you know, I have some conflicts because I see the logistical issues associated with the administration of the assessment, but I also believe in the only gold standard that as a nation we have, regardless of conditions. So I spoke in a protected way to our NAGB board. I understand the council's position. I have an opinion that if we can, in a protected way, legitimate way, where the data gathered is actually reliable, valid, and informs the nation, we should try to do it. But I have concerns at the same time about our ability to, in fact, achieve a point of validity and reliability. And that's an ongoing conversation.
And I'll jump in there very quickly and say there's a middle ground between conducting the full TUDA analysis, which requires large numbers of schools in each of these cities to participate, and participating in the broader NAEP project, which may be a way to thread the needle there.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So
Mark.
Alberto, here's an offshoot of that. What assessments are planned for measuring you and your team and your staff's efforts across your 350,000 or so? I know it's probably more now since I was there, students. So what is the plan for measuring student learning and student growth? And what is the longer term plan for charting the recovery of individual students over the next several years?
Yeah. You know, so I'll start with the second part, because I do think that the recovery, the academic recovery from this historic regression that I think will be detected across the country is not going to be, unfortunately, very, very swift in many parts of the country. We have developed a plan, obviously. We're not relying simply on state assessments, because obviously we would have to wait until the end of the year to really find out what I believe we already know is, you know, on the basis of pre-existing data. There are certain pockets of our community, our student community, who we know have already regressed. Secondly, we have very organic data that we obtain through a number of different organizations. iReady is a high usage, highly informative tool that we use in our school system. And just reflecting on the spring of 2020, unlike, and this was a study done by iReady itself, by Curriculum Associates, unlike most of the nation, our kids did not stop the use of the resources. They actually, within days, went up to levels of utilization of digital resources, and their performance, after some degree of slippage in the first days, was restored as well. That informed our 2 summer virtual programs and now continues to inform the reopening. So we don't rely on end-of-year assessments, which the state will restore this year. We, as you well know, we have formative assessments that are periodic. They are data analyzed by our principals, senior staff, through a process known as Datacom. That gives us the pulse of a district very, in a very accurate way, down to a student, a classroom, a grade level, a feeder pattern, district-wide. And those are the measures we use, in addition, obviously, to the state assessments.
One more question, Alberto, then we'll go to Mari to close. Here's a nice one to end on. Miami-Dade's elementary schools are especially high performing. Many of the highest growth elementary schools in the country, according to iReady, as you mentioned, are in Miami-Dade. What's working? What do you think these schools are doing that explains some of their great results?
Yeah, and not only that, you know, look at TUDA, you know, 4th grade reading and math, #1 in the country. #2 in 8th grade, I believe, reading and math. I think there are 4 fundamental things that are working very well in these schools in the district that's resulting in that data. And look, we're still dealing, and I participated in the earlier sessions, we're still dealing with historic gaps, but they have improved in Miami-Dade over time at a faster clip than many other districts by a series of measures, including to the data, but also graduation rates for minority, non-minority students. I think #1, our data-driven focus on instruction has a lot to do with that. Secondly, leadership. As you probably know, and I discussed this at a number of Harvard meetings, one of the first things we did as a team when we came in to Miami-Dade is we removed union rights from leadership. So principals are not union leaders. They are at-will employees. So we replaced 85 to 90% of the leadership, appointed great leaders who have the independent ability to hire great teachers, vetted by the school system. The other thing is the ongoing professional development that we have deployed. Very, very strategic, side by side with differentiated support and differentiated funding on the basis of performance, but also on the basis of performance, additional autonomy to high-performing schools with financial remuneration for teachers that was negotiated with the union. We transitioned from a step schedule for teachers to performance pay via negotiation a number of years back. I still have deep scars on my back for it, but it has worked out. The same thing for school leaders. And lastly, parental support and the eliminating the digital divide, really opening the door to ongoing 24/7, anytime, anywhere learning beyond the schoolhouse. And the most important one, and I've said this time and time again, the power of choice. I think that we embrace choice. We have ridden the tsunami of choice by surfing the top rather than hiding from it. And that's why we have over 1,000 choice programs and charter schools in Miami. Through the public school system, as I said, some of the highest performing, 9 years in a row, highest performing school district in the nation in terms of choice, magnet programs, magnet schools of America. And I think that level of wide choice for parents, and yes, to a certain extent that we don't really focus on that, but the national organic competition has led to a rising tide lifting all ships in terms of performance in Miami-Dade.
Thank you, Alberto.
So let me just close this unplanned session by giving my sincere thanks to Superintendent Carvalho for taking the time to spend with us today amidst all that's going on in Miami-Dade. Thank you also to participants in the next panel for their forbearance as we squeezed Alberto in. Take it away, Chris, to that panel.
Thank you, Marty. Superintendent Carvalho, we hope you'll stay with us because we're about to talk about choice in district schools.